on Zoom. My name is Sandy. I am the Education Technology Manager at the Detroit Zoological Society, which means that I design programming for people in all sorts of different ages and different venues. I also implement that programming, so I work with either our volunteers or I actually do it myself to put the programming in place. Our department switched to completely virtual last year. We were working from home. We were putting films or videos together. If you check out our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, my department has put together about 800 videos in the last year and a half, which is quite a feat considering in the beginning of the year, we didn't all know how to video edit. It was me that knew how to do it. So we all figured it out and we learned it together, and I'm really proud of my department and my team to be able to do that. I'm also really excited to be here with you all today to talk about the zoo history. At the end, I'm going to leave time for questions, and they don't have to be zoo history related. And I'm going to be honest, if you ask me a question I don't know the answer to, we're going to look it up together because I don't want to tell you something incorrectly. And there's a lot of zoo history out there, and there's a chance that I may not know the answer. But all questions are fair game at the end. My background is in elementary education. My degree is in science and social studies. My master's degree is in education technology. So I say that to say that you can just, if you have a question, just blurt it out. It doesn't bother me. Please do. If I'm talking too fast, talking too loud, too slow, let me know. I'll adjust. And my Zoom friends, if you have questions, Amelia is watching the chat, so go ahead and just put them in the chat for me, and I will address them as they come up. Okay, so I don't have any pictures of the very beginning of the zoo because it was in 1883, and it was the start of a very small circus went out of business in the city of Detroit. It just went bankrupt, and they just left the animals. The city of Detroit was like, yeah, we don't think so. The people in the city of Detroit. So they put together a small zoo. Unfortunately, that zoo was not financially stable, and they lasted about a year. And then those animals were then donated to the city of Detroit, which is how the animals ended up on Belle Isle. So in 1873, the city of Detroit had acquired Belle Isle, and so then they put the animals on Belle Isle, and that's how the Belle Isle Zoo started. So that is how the Detroit Zoological Society really started, and it gives us kind of a really great foundation to get an idea of where our values come from. So the Detroit Zoological Society has 4 main pillars: animal welfare, education, sustainability, conservation. Thank you. I always have to go through it in order, and I didn't do it that time, so thank you. Yes, conservation. So those are our pillars. And if you think about animal welfare, those animals were abandoned. And in the very beginning, the first animals that we were in charge of were rescues. So that is the foundation of the whole zoo, and that's how we started. There we go. In 1911, the Detroit Zoological Society was formed. And they were a group of citizens who wanted to form a second zoo in the area. So they started purchasing land and selling land to find the very perfect property to have the Detroit Zoo on. So this here is the only image that I can find of the land that the zoo now sits on. So the zoo is on Woodward and 10 Mile. I can't tell you where any of this is. There's no landmarks, but this is the property that was purchased and that was finally developed. Oh gosh. I promise I do this like every day. How about now? You know, there we go. I don't know. I don't know. I have a couple of speculations. I don't know if we want to hear speculations.
Almost looks like they all have.
That's my speculation, but I do know that that's that's the Rackham Fountain, or Rackham Golf Course, and the Rackham family was pivotal in building the Rackham Fountain, which is that bear fountain in the middle of the zoo. So we call that the Rackham Fountain. So that might be part of the golf course. There's no information that I can find that verifies that.
How many acres is it?
So our current zoo is 125 acres.
I'm going to try and do stuff down so people will here will see the pictures. There we go.
Okay. Now I just got to get my mouse back. There we go. Okay. So this is the master plan of the zoo that was designed by, did I not write it down? Oh, Arthur A. Shurtleff. I always forget his name. So when he came and designed the zoo, again, the Detroit Zoological Society wanted the zoo to be innovative. So at that time, zoos were very much bars, cages, cement floors, very, very kind of like a sterile environment. And the Detroit Zoological Society wanted to be different. We wanted to think more of a park-like kind of setting. So this is one of his very first drawings. This is huge. This is actually laying on the floor when I took the photo. It's probably like from blue stripe to dark gray stripe. Really very large. It's beautiful, and if you look at it, you can see that there's a lot of trees. It feels very park-esque. So when Arthur A. Shurtleff was designing this park, he really wanted to make sure it was more of a park that happened to house animals than a zoo that was a park. So when he's designing these habitats, he was designing habitats to be large and expansive and have trees. But then also, let me see if I can get this to hide. I promise I'm good with technology, whatever. So these habitats are really large. They're barless. So to get that barless ability, that means we had to implement moats. So when you visit the zoo, you'll notice that there's a big gap between you and where the animals can be, and that moat design is to help give you and the animals space, separate spaces, and also to give you your eye, trick your eye a little bit. You feel closer to the animals than you actually are. It's really actually very neat if you can actually go on Google Maps, and I've done this a couple of times. You can actually measure like where the path is to where the crest is, and it's much further than it looks. And I promise it's all very safe. We all figure out like exactly how far can that animal jump, and then we add a couple feet, right? So that's all in the design, and that was in the very beginning. Thinking about it as a park, this is the initial design. So I am going to break this map down because I just do think it is kind of interesting to see. Well, that's quite the delay. It is kind of interesting to see how the park has changed over time. We don't actually refer to it as a park any longer. We refer to it as the zoo. But the design was as a park. So in the front of the zoo, and the initial plan was to have this free-range bison. If you've been to the zoo recently, you'll know that there's this big, expansive, open grass area, the very first thing that you're greeted with when you enter the zoo. And there were two different bird habitats over here. And there is a bird habitat here, the Polk Penguin Conservation Center, which is currently under construction. But the zoo has now been kind of reframed into conservation campus. So the front part of the zoo is the conservation campus, and the further back of the zoo is, I don't think I've ever heard it called anything but just the not conservation campus. The conservation campus is in the front. We also now have a parking structure, which seems like a really weird thing to kind of point out, but like when people came to the zoo before, they walked. At one point they actually drove through the zoo for a very, very short period of time. That's not something that happens so much anymore. Towards the middle of the zoo, this is where it gets a little dicey in here. So raccoons were going to be an animal that were on habitat. Prairie dogs, which are animals that live here at the zoo. Fox, wolverines, and there was a dairy farm, which would be more like cows. So kind of like our barn. Towards the middle of the zoo now, we have a wetland area. We have the amphibian building, the wildlife interpretive gallery where the butterflies and the birds live, as well as the Holden Reptile Conservation Center up here. So again, conservation is a really big part of our footprint, and that's really comes through in our current map. But when we look at where we were kind of thinking, the other thing too, when you look at how he designed this map, there is no specific path with it, right? You meander through his park and you happen across habitats, which is really frustrating if you're a visitor and you really want to see the otters and there's like no direct path to get there. So as the zoo has changed over time, the map, we've designed the zoo to be thoughtful about a pathway that people can take through the zoo to be most efficient to see the animals as well as enjoy the space. Towards the back of the zoo, this has not changed too much. It's changed in fauna, but it has not changed in intent. So there is the mall, which is where the bear fountain is currently. So that was not in the initial plan, but it is here, the mall, which is the big grassy area down the middle of the zoo. The elk, the antelope, and there were several habitats back here that were left unlabeled. And currently at the zoo, this is where we start to get those large, charismatic mammals that people think of when they think of zoos, right? Your lions, your tigers, your chimpanzees, your gorillas, camels, red pandas, they're all right in that area, right? So that's where people want, when they tend to come to the zoo, they want to see those particular animals. And so that intent hasn't really changed in the map. There's a carousel if you wanted to ride one. This is where it gets really interesting. So, and I apologize, it's kind of dark. But if you look here, back here, you see those 3 rocky structures, 1, 2, and 3. Those are the bear dens, and they are still there today. They are right here. The original bear dens that were built in the 20s are still there today, and we're actually going to see how they've been modified to accommodate animals and animal management for today. This is our current map, because I cut it up and I figured it'd be better to kind of show you real quick. But you can see that dotted line is that path. If you visit the zoo, you can always take that dotted line path. That's what I always recommend people take. It gets you through most of the zoo and you get to see basically everything. The very first building that was built on the zoo grounds was what we call today the Wildlife Interpretive Gallery. So these are the original photo, and this is our entrance today. One of the things that's really interesting about this building is that what we today use as the entrance is not actually the intended entrance. And I'll kind of show you that in a minute. But if you look, how you can figure it out is this is a chimney, and the chimney is over here. The building was designed to house birds free-flighted, but not free-flighted. So if you go into the building now, there's this big glass dome, and the birds can fly wherever they'd like. So they were flighted birds. You can see here there's cages that those men are working on, and that's one space that the birds could use, but it was not designed. It was eventually changed into more of the Wildlife Interpretive Gallery. This is what it looks like today. There's that chimney. You can kind of see those are those windows that you saw in the beginning. I tried to get the same view for you all, but there's a big glass structure in the way, so you can't really get it. But that was the entry that we all are familiar with. If you go into the building, it's really fascinating because you don't notice it unless you stop to look. So you go through the rotunda, you go into the butterfly garden, and this is the door that leads into the butterfly garden. If you turn around, that is the old exterior of the building. So that brick that's in there, that was at one point outside. In that kind of glass vestibule, if you look up, there's the original Slavic pottery that's in there. So that building has really changed. I love the fact that it's original to the zoo. It has been completely gutted and repurposed. It's housed aquariums at one point, but now it's an art space, which is a really great use of the space. And now the butterflies and the birds can be free-flighted, which is really awesome for them. That's exciting. Oh, you know why? Because I exported it as a P. And I just really quick switch over to. Make sure I do this right. Okay, so this is the free flight aviary. So this is the walkthrough portion of the building. So this was the outside area. This is that big glass area. One of the things that's really cool about this space is that you can see those birds kind of flying free, and that's not something that initially was designed into the zoo. So in the beginning, having free-flighted birds was not, they had them flighted in very small spaces, but they didn't have the ability to free fly. And this is a very long video, so we won't watch the whole thing, but you can see our little friends share the same path as we all do. The water tower. It has changed over time. It looks very different now, but you can see here in this picture, I think that says Coleman A. Young is on that water tower, so that gives you an idea of timing on that. This is a really cool photo because you can see those big gates that you drive through as you are coming and entering the zoo. The zoo went through several building booms at different times different times in its history, and this is one of those booms. Is when they started to really build an infrastructure. You can see there's lots of cranes back here. I can't find hard data that supports this, but I think this is around the same time that the parking structure was built. So there was a really big interest in the zoo. This is what the water tower looks like today, in case you haven't seen it. So these are the habitats being built. So this is those bear dens I was talking about earlier. Remember, there's the 3 sections of it. So the way they built habitats is they built rebar, which is just like metal, and then they used gunite, which is a material that's really, really solid and really easy to kind of manipulate, and they use that to put over the rebar. And you can see here is the moat, and where that pile of dirt is where guests would stand once the habitat is built. And you can see, did I say the moat has water in it? Did I say that? Did I just think that? Sometimes I say it. But the habitat, as it kind of gets built, you can kind of see here, the habitats are fairly complex, right? Thinking back to the times that they were built, they have water and they have levels and they have some trees. But we're just going to take a second and I want you to tell me, how many polar bears do you see in this space? 9. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 polar bears. It's a lot of polar bears. 4. I always have to count again because we just had cubs, so I always have to go through it again in my head. 4. And they have about triple the space in this than they do in this habitat. I can't tell in this photo if these are grizzly bears, brown bears, or black bears, but how many of the darker colored bears are there? I definitely see 4.
I see 4. It looks like there's 2 in the water.
Oh, maybe right here, and yeah, definitely. So there's at least 4. There's potentially up to 6, right? There's a lot of polar bears in that. Or I'm sorry, there's a lot of bears in this space in general. I can't find photos of. There's one more on this side. I've not been able to find any photos of that particular habitat. This is, again, those polar bears. You can kind of see what they have access to, what water they have. This is, again, super, super unusual for zoos. The fact that you're so close to them. I mean, look at how close you are to that polar bear. Just like size-wise, you're really close to them. But when we think about what we know animals need today, this is just not acceptable, right? We know that. We know that animals need more space, that having animals in small spaces like this with large numbers is not healthy for them. That's not what they need to thrive, and that's what we want to make sure we're doing for the animals in our care. Also, just, oh my God. Today, we have 3 grizzly bears that share that space. So if you look at this shelf bit right here, it is right here. So it's the existing structure, but you'll notice this here used to come all the way out, and it used to be 3 separate spaces. So they have taken that and made it all one big giant space where they used to house over, 15 bears? Now houses 3. 3 boys who live together. And these 3 boys, they were rescued. Their mother was killed. They were too young to take care of themselves. So they came here to live at the zoo, and they will live here for the rest of their lives. And we are able to provide them that space because we don't overpack the zoo, right? Like, our goal is to make sure we have space to accommodate animals who need rescue.
Would you say that even back then you had some of the bears that still the Detroit Zoo was like more advanced because they're not in a big spot?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about where other zoos were basically stationary circuses, right? So it's like concrete pad, bars. And
it's bad for the bears now, but you look at where they could have been and you're like, they're living like royalty.
Absolutely. Right, yeah. And I mean, they had access to water, they had access to move around. At that time, I don't know if they gave them options to go inside or not, but they have a lot of space, but there were problems with this housing, right? Like, we had a lot of issues with animal management at that point. So thinking about how far we've come is one of the things I'm always really proud of, like, especially in that bear den area. It really, really is a big change on how we've managed them. Another thing that's kind of recent is that the Detroit Zoological Society has to think about not just how to keep animals in spaces, but how to keep people out of them. So you will notice around our habitats, there are lots of plantings like this. Any gardeners in here? Any avid gardeners? Couple, yeah? Would you want to jump into that?
Well, I've been to the zoo before, and I know that, you mean
Like in the...
If I was a person, would I step into it?
Into that spit, yeah. No, because all those plants are pokey. They're all going to poke you. They're very, very pokey, and that is dug down pretty deep. So you're going to end up in another moat before you even get to the retaining wall that gets into the habitat. So those are all changes that you will see throughout the zoo. Not about just making sure there's space between the animal and the guest, but making sure there's space between the guest area and the animal area.
I feel though, if we're going to go in a zoo habitat or something like that, I mean, I love that you're doing that, but still, you're going to go into something that's going to kill you anyway, possibly.
Yeah, we also do have children who are at the zoo, right, who don't realize that particularly, right? So these are all steps that we need to take to make sure that we're protecting human life. So this is just I could not find, there we go. So this is kind of that side-by-side photo of the 2 habitats. You can see Boo there being really silly. I'll play that one more time because I went really fast. Let's see if it'll do it again. This is from my Facebook Live, which is why my face is on it. But you can see those walls are gone. Same pools. Okay, I didn't mean to play it a 3rd time. There we go. Lions. Who doesn't love a baby, right? So to get people to come to the zoo, let's have more babies, right? More babies, more people will come. 1 year in the zoo, I believe it was 17 lions were born in 1 year. That is a lot of lions. And you can see here, this is actually, I can't say that for sure. I think this is where the lions currently are, but they've extended their habitat out. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 male lions that are being housed together. Again, knowing what we know about animal management now, probably not the best choice. Now Now, to say that, there is a baby lion who lives at the Detroit Zoo currently. Her name is Binti. But she was the product of something called an SSP, or a Species Survival Plan. So the Detroit Zoological Society is part of an institution called AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And how SSPs work is it's kind of like Match.com for zoo animals. So they look at the genetics and they make sure that there's not any inbreeding happening, and that we're making sure that we're being responsible. We're also making sure that an institution would have space for that potential offspring. So there's a lot of different things that happen before an animal is born at a zoo today. I do have to say Binti's really cute. And this is her aunt. Binti was born, her mother had preeclampsia, and Binti, unfortunately, they had to do a C-section, and the mother was not interested in Binti after her birth, so she was hand-raised and then was introduced into her aunt, and her aunt has taken over teaching her how to be a lion. This is a really fun picture. Okay, so I should have asked this in the beginning. Who's been to the zoo recently-ish? Okay, couple years. Okay, so in this photo here, you can see what is still called today Monkey Island. And you can see where the elephants used to live. And I don't know, just give me a ballpark of how many monkeys you think you see here. Too many. Pardon? Oh, I'm so sorry.
They can't come to a zoo talk about it.
I would say there probably, even though you can, just based on what you can see, there's quite a few, but they probably had 50, 60 in that exhibit.
In 1936, there were 200 animals living in this space. So you can kind of see here, this is opening day.
Oh my gosh. You mean like for the season or when the zoo opened?
To my understanding, it was opening day of the zoo, the very first day the zoo was open. And there were 200-ish.
People.
Right, I mean the people. Mm-hmm. I also do like to point out, when I talk to kids about this, I always like to point out their hats and their clothes, right? Like, they were going, it's like a Sunday outing, right? Like they were dressed up and they were in their best to go to the zoo. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't, no. Another interesting thing is in 1930, the Reptiles, so the reptile building that's at the zoo today was built in the 60s, but in the 30s there were 30 alligators, 24 turtles, 218 snakes, and they didn't have a place to house them in the winter, so they packed them up and shipped them to Ohio every winter. Oh. We don't do that now. Pardon?
Another zoo in Ohio took them?
I don't have that detail. I just know that they went somewhere in Ohio. So I'm assuming that it was someplace that had some sort of heating that could take care of them. Did you have a question? I thought I heard someone.
I was going to say the zoo in Saginaw does that every winter. They clear some of their animals out because it gets too cold.
Too cold?
And it's just so small.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard too, right? Like if I think about what we call life support that's at the zoo, so the air conditioning, the water quality stuff, all of that's all on generators. So if we lose power, the generators all turn on because these animals are dependent on us to make sure that we can keep them alive, right? And not just alive, but to thrive. So those are all things we're thinking about. But yeah, 200 monkeys. This is Monkey Island today. You will notice that it is the same structure. You'll notice there's trees in here. So when trees fall at the zoo, we waste nothing. It goes into a habitat somewhere. And if I am correct, here's one of the baby, right here, one of the baby Japanese macaques that live at the zoo. And there's one there too. Again, all through SSP programs. Yeah?
Plant new trees to replace the old ones?
We do. We actually, this year, I think we planted don't quote me, around 100 trees on grounds.
Like little seedlings or mid-size or what?
A combination of both. And so we have some seedlings towards the front, outside of the building that I work in, which is the Ford Education Center. They take this giant machine. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. I was fascinated. It's like a thing, and it just like picks up the tree and they just move it somewhere else. So they grow up some of the trees in front of our building to get them a little bigger, and they put those in habitats, and now we have another set of trees in front of our building, which will stay there for a couple of years. I imagine that they'll probably grab them and take them elsewhere. But yeah, we definitely are constantly planting trees. If you go to the zoo soon, you'll notice that there's trees with green bags around the base of them, and that's because they've planted so many trees. To keep them watered and alive, we have to use like an irrigation system, which this green bag is. So the landscaping staff will go around and put water in that bag, and it somehow irrigates the tree. But yes, we do definitely plant more trees. Yeah.
Getting ahead of the game.
You're fine.
Yeah. But if you're going to put the tree in that one, obviously you have to have it big enough to get a truck
Yeah.
carrying that. You take the animals out so that the truck can arrive without having animals investigating what they're doing.
Yeah.
Hindering them or
It-
endangering them.
Totally depends on the particular animal. So the grizzly bears will go inside. The Japanese macaques will probably go inside. Some of them choose not to, and that is their choice. Some of them don't like to come inside, and so they don't have to. If they choose not to come inside, that means that we have animal care staff we have extra animal care staff out there making sure, keeping eyes on stuff. The wolves, one of the wolves does not like to come in. He will not come in. Doesn't matter, you cannot get him to come in. So some of those animals, if they don't choose to come inside, we're not going to not put new things into their habitat. There are protocols for all of those things. But it's called Crane Day. It's always a very exciting day at the zoo when we know Crane Day is coming, and we get an email and Crane Day is coming, and we all grab our cameras because we need to make sure we catch this. And they move trees from one place to another, and they put them in the bear habitat in the pool, and they chain them up, and they do all of this stuff, and the animals love it. One thing too that's important to notice is that in this habitat, you'll notice it's kind of hard to see, but you can kind of see some of the roping and the chaining. These are all chained very, very well into place. We don't want to have happen is a tree that we've put in there all across the moat. Okay, but we also have storm protocols, right? We all had that bad storm on Saturday. There's protocols that we go into place, and certain habitats are checked first, and we go through, count things. That's what we do. There's lots of protocols for that kind of stuff. I don't remember what comes next, so we'll just go with it.
Are any of the animals
Yeah.
smart enough to try to push the tree across the moat? I don't know if smart enough is the word. We, to my knowledge, have not had an animal in a guest space that was like dangerous in decades. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. Could they? Yeah. Do they appear to be trying?
That's a good question. Yeah.
But you see it pushing at it every day.
I mean, if we saw some behavior like that, that would be something that we would alert the animal care staff. We would alert, we have a team called CZAW, which is the Center for Zoo and Animal Welfare. The Center for Zoo and Animal Welfare and Ethics. Center for Zoo and Aquarium Animal Welfare and Ethics. I knew I forgot a word in there, so sorry. CZAW. They are our animal welfare people, so they keep an eye on everything like that. So if there's something weird where we see an animal's like, hey, we're gonna bring it up, and we're gonna see, is that an stereotypical behavior? So is that a behavior that we would see for like soothing? Is that animal stressed out in some way? Is there something that we need to do to help make that animal more comfortable, or is that animal just deciding it needs to like do that? Do we need to give them something else to do? And that's something that we work really hard on doing, is enrichment. So the animals are provided what's called enrichment. And so, you know, this may seem silly, but to give a polar bear a watermelon, Nuka will put that watermelon in his mouth and just crush the whole thing, like just with his mouth. It's terrifying. But giving the animals opportunities to participate in species-specific behaviors. So each species has a different thing that they need to do. So if you think about, does anyone have companion animal? Dogs, cats, birds? They all do different things, right? Like my dog does not care about the laser pointer. My cat may care a lot about the laser pointer. But maybe one cat does and one cat doesn't. So thinking about what that particular animal species needs to do in the wild, making sure that we're replicating opportunities for them to participate in those types of behaviors. So this bird, for example, he is a African crested, his name is Sid. And Sid is an animal who uses his beak to get his food. So by putting his food, a portion of his food in this provides him an opportunity to use his beak and to move his feet to get his food. Same with the lions, for example, giving them the access to, this is a papier-mâché zebra that, no, promise. A papier-mâché zebra that has been stuffed full of meat. And so those lions are going to go and they're going to stalk. And they're going to watch it. And then they're going to pounce. Right? And those are behaviors that we would expect to see. But I wouldn't expect to see Sid do that kind of behavior. Right? So thinking about each individual animal and each individual species, but then also each individual animal. So maybe one lion likes to do this behavior and one lion doesn't.
The lions ever been I've seen it on lion birds.
You know, I can't say for sure. I've never seen in their habitats that they have access to like a box. A lot of times they get these kinds of, why is it not changing? Oh, there it goes. I changed it a long time ago on my screen, sorry. They get access to these kinds of things because those are those more species-specific behaviors. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. So for grizzly bears, using their nose, using their claws to dig into something, all species-specific behaviors. So if we happen to see a grizzly bear, there are stereotypical bear behaviors for a bear that is stressed out. So for example, one of the bears who used to live here at the zoo, she came from a circus, and so she had coping mechanisms that she would use to kind of self-soothe, and she'd stand in one corner of her habitat and she'd rock back and forth. And that's a stereotypical behavior. So we know that that animal is stressed out. That's how she self-soothes. It doesn't mean that she's not living a bad life right now, but that's how she kind of coped with her life. We actually found her a really great sanctuary to go to, where she has more space, and she does that behavior less now. She still does it, but she does it less. So those are all things we look for. Right? I mean, man.
That Alaska show. Some of their cabins, and I'm like, gee, now I see why.
I did want to talk about, because I think they're just adorable, Lerka and Astra are the two polar bear cubs who were born at the zoo in November. And they're a really interesting case because they were twins. They were born at the same time. Astra was doing great. Lerka was not thriving. So we have in the maternity den, which you can kind of see in this photo here, we have cameras that we can use to kind of watch them, and thermal cameras, and we can notice she wasn't doing well. So they made the decision to lure Suka out into another space with some food, and then close the door and went in and got Lyrica out and hand-raised Lyrica. So Lyrica was hand-raised. Astra was raised by mom. They are now about this big and stinking adorable. They're both doing really well. It's a really big job to raise any animal by hand. Our goal is to never do that. Our goal is to let mom do what she can, but we don't want to have failure to thrive. Right? We want to step in. This year, we raised a lion, a chimpanzee, and a polar bear, all by hand, which is a huge testament to the animal care staff who are spending night and day sleeping on the floor, laying on the floor with a bottle so that Lyrica can nurse with her, because that's what she would need. That's what her mom does. So I bring this up because when we think about zoo history, these are not things that we would used to do, but now we know this is important. In the past, animals potentially were purchased or were captured from the wild. Today, that does not happen. If there are animals who are wild animals that were wild caught, they were wild caught because they were injured. So the eagles that live at the zoo, all three of them have wing amputations, so they cannot fly. So they have to be cared for by humans. The grizzly bears, they were all orphaned, so they needed a home. So that animal management that strategy has kind of changed. I don't remember why I put this photo in here. Oh, that's why, because it went into enrichment. So kind of just going back to the habitat spaces just looking different, right? Like now we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to use their noses and use their spaces and making sure that their habitats look different every couple of days. The penguins get ice. The penguins have this thing that's like PVC that shoots water, and the animal care staff just move it around every couple of days just to make it new and different. And those are all animal management strategies. Okay, those are all my points. Perfect. I am open for questions. Oh, that's the question of the year. It is still we are still working on repairs. So it was, no. I wish I had a timetable for you. Soon as we know, it will be all over our social media, I promise.
What happened? Isn't the Penguinarium relatively new?
It is a new building, so it wasn't properly waterproofed when it was built. And so the people who built the building had to re-waterproof it. But we're still working on it.
So are the penguins shipped out?
No, the penguins are currently they're still being cared for. They're in the Penguinarium. Some have moved over to the Polk Penguin Conservation Center. There's still debate whether or not they need to move back. So we're still trying to figure that out. But they're being cared for on grounds by the staff who've cared for them the whole time. Yeah. So we didn't decommission the Penguinarium in case we had no idea this was going to happen, right? But like just in case, we kept it running, and probably a good thing we did. Yeah.
I know when I went to the zoo, there was like lots of ducks and things,
Mhm.
because it's such a public setting. And
Yeah.
I said, are there animals that come in the zoo and just kind of use it?
Yeah.
Habitat? Is that a problem?
So we have what we call non-resident animals. So the animals who we provide care for that we have brought to the zoo, they're resident animals. Non-resident animals, ducks and geese and, yep. They're animals that we have to be conscious about making sure that we're keeping the animals under our care safe. So there are strategies that we use to try to mitigate those kinds of things, and they can cause potential problems. But we do have really strict, staff can only eat in very designated spaces, and how the food is handled to try to mitigate as much of that as possible. If you walk into our commissary where all of our food, is brought into the zoo, it is cleaner than my kitchen. Beth runs a tight ship. There is not a piece of hay out of place. And that is so that we can mitigate some of those non-resident animals. Yeah?
Is there any plans to put in lighting along the pathway at all for nighttime activities?
I'm not sure. I know right now the mall road is lit, but I'm not sure about future plannings for lighting. Yeah. Yeah, so in February, Nana, who is one of the female polar bears, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So Nana, who is one of the female polar bears who lived here at the zoo, she unfortunately passed away. And initial reports made us think that maybe Nuka, who was the male that was in the space with her, had killed her. But what we do, every animal who lives here at the zoo, they go through a necropsy. And so Nana's body went through a necropsy, and it actually just was revealed, and I wrote it down because I knew someone was going to ask me, that she had advanced heart disease and that she was in some sort of attack at that point when Nuka tried to mate with her, and the bites that were on her from Nuka were not fatal bites. So she just unfortunately had essentially a heart attack, and Nuka was with her, and Nuka didn't know, like, because she was behaving in a different way, he didn't know how to behave. So Nuka is safe to go with other polar bears, which is really good to know, because polar bears in general in the world, the population of polar bears is declining rapidly, and there's very few polar bears that are in zoos at the moment. So we don't even have like a great assurance population. And an assurance population is a group of animals that could potentially, their offspring could potentially go back into the wild. So the Przewalski horses is a really great example of that, which is a wild horse. They were extinct in the wild. Zoos came together. They had an assurance population. They were able to reproduce horses and then eventually get their offsprings out into the wild, and there's now Przewalski horses in the wild. So that's one of the things that the zoos really conscious of trying to do, that if the environment is stable enough, we can introduce offspring into the wild.
Well, how many polar bears are there? There's 2 little ones?
2 little ones and mom and dad. So Suka, Nuka, Astra, and Lyrica. So 4.
It's not unusual, though, for the polar bears. That's been, like, notorious for all zoos, that it's not unusual. I know my father used to work at the zoo.
Okay.
So back in the 70s, there were triplets that had been born, and the 3 triplets were killed by their mother at different stages. And
Yeah.
because each some of the main workers were had named the polar bears, and my father had named one after me. So mine was the last to go, but mine got killed.
Yeah.
But
And
it was not unusual. So every time I hear that, it's something that for me has been something that I notice it right away when you hear about a polar bear dying.
Right.
So it's something that I've been hearing for years.
Yeah. And it seems like it's hard to get cubs, right? Like something doesn't seem to work so well. So, we're really happy that Lyrica and Astra are here, and it was a risk to go in because polar bear moms do kill their cubs. It was a risk, but
I didn't know that they would do that.
yeah.
Is that part of the reason you did that?
No, I don't know if that's part of the reason. The main reason was Lyrica wasn't thriving. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't work directly with the animals, so there's certain things I don't know. Like when people ask you exactly how many penguins live at the zoo, I have no idea. Someone knows, I promise, but I always have to look it up. But failure to thrive is what we've been told. And so making the decision to go in there, and the animal care staff felt like, they could go in there quickly, take Lyrica out, and not disturb anything. And Suka did fine with it. But Suka's an individual bear whereas another bear may not do so well with that. So that's just kind of something that the animal care staff who work with the individual animals have to kind of get to know the animals too.
We have a question in the
Yeah.
chat about elephants. Will the elephants be visiting because they miss Winky and Wanda?
So I'm so glad I wrote this down. Winky and Wanda were the last two elephants to ever live at the Detroit Zoo, and we will not have elephants at the zoo again. In 2005, Winky and Wanda moved to the Paws Sanctuary in California. So what do we know about how elephants in the wild live? Large territories, right? So they're walking a lot, right? So they're walking. What else do we know about how elephants live? Herds, right? So Winky and Wanda were two elephants who were living in a decent-sized habitat, but still relatively small for them. If you think about a pathway that has been walked on multiple times in your garden, that ground is harder than the grass. So the space that they were in, that ground, basically became concrete. So it was hard. Elephants were developing arthritis. And we knew that they deserved better. That we could find a spot for them where they could walk and they could live in big herds. And that's what we did. We found a place that they could go, and they lived. I don't remember who lived longer. One of them lived for 3 years, one of them lived for 10 years at the Paws Sanctuary. Very happy. And again, I don't remember which one, but one of them found an elephant that she had been in a circus with. And they had this big, great reunion. Wow. Like the, woo, right? Like the really, really, really great reunion. Wow. So it's that's every time I tell that story, literally get chills down my back.
Yeah, they have memory.
They do, yeah. But like that is what was best for the elephants, right? So we are always trying to think of what is best for the animals under our care, even if that means that we need to find a better space for them, because their welfare is what is important. Yeah.
I remember when I was really small, going on field trips to the zoo, and there was a chimpanzee show or something.
I did it with a chimp trainer and then for years.
Yeah.
He used to bring Skeeter home with him. I forgot about them all the time.
Yeah.
I noticed it wasn't in the original plan.
Yep.
They added it, and we were just talking about it the other day.
Yeah.
When did they add it?
I don't have the exact.
Like 70s or
Yeah.
My dad retired in 1984, and he was head keeper when he retired.
And what was your dad's name?
Ernie Soderberg.
Okay.
And they hadn't been the Chimp Shows. I want to say it was like probably the late 70s when they shut that whole thing down. So, oh my gosh! And if you have a picture of my dad, I'm going to be just thrilled.
So I wasn't going to talk about this.
My dad didn't like him, but he was an idiot all the time. So he didn't like him. But yeah, he did. He used to do. It was like Sunday mornings with Sonny Elliott. Yeah, at the zoo. Yeah.
Okay, so I do have some photos of the chimp stuff. Animal shows. Yep. Joe Mindy. Oh, thank you. Joe Mindy. Let me just do this right. Hang on. Was a vaudeville. Joe Mindy was a chimpanzee who was a vaudeville actor. And there were chimp shows at the zoo. And you can see here, the chimpanzees are doing unnatural behaviors, right? They're wearing clothes. And it's funny, sort of. But the process to get a chimp to stand up and to ride a bike and to wear a hat is very cruel. The way to get that animal there is you basically have to break their spirit. And it's not something that we would do today, right? Like, if I look at this chimp, it's funny. But, like, if I think about that particular animal, Joe Mindy, it's very well documented. He was oftentimes drunk. They'd give him cigars. These are all things that are just not okay, right? And so, like, today, we want to see this. We want to see chimps in family groups. We want to see them interacting with each other. We want to see them have choice to participate. Joe Mindy would do upwards of, I believe, 10 shows a day, where he would get carted to one place or another across different places. So it is not a part of our history that we're proud of, but it is not something we hide, right? Like, it's one of those things that's like, okay, we need to recognize it, and we need to talk about it too, and we need to say, we recognize that that was maybe not in the best interest of that particular animal. Now we know better, and now we need to do better. We need to make sure we're providing animals with expansive spaces, as much space as we possibly can, with opportunities to live in family groups, to do natural species-specific behaviors. Yeah. Yeah. So it was closed for a while because of COVID. So we had the tunnel area closed. They also were doing construction. We recently got sea otters that now live in the same habitat space as the polar bears, not in the same like space, but like when you walk down the path, they're in a different like pool. So it's open now. It might have just been kind of a fluke, but was the whole path closed?
You couldn't go in the tunnel.
Yeah. The tunnel has just reopened. I think it was July 4th or something like that. It reopened.
So is the zoo basically completely reopened now?
I'm trying to think of any buildings that aren't currently open. The Polk Penguin Conservation Center is not open.
The number of people they let in limited daily?
So we do have, thank you, time ticket entry. So you have to reserve your time to come in. That doesn't mean you have to leave at a certain time, but we do have time ticket entry. And that also kind of helps too, the zoo is running into staffing issues just like everybody else. And we want to make sure that, guests enjoy their visit and they're not waiting in giant lines to do something or other. So we want to make sure that we can accommodate that too. So those are all things that are being considered. Train is running. It started running on Friday. Every day something new happens. Yay! Carousel's running, train's running.
We still have our zoo key when we were kids.
Oh, goodness.
We moved out of their home in 2013. My baby sister found it. She goes, "What is this?" She sent a picture to everybody. Other sister right away.
It's a zoo key, yeah.
Brought over, forgot to put it in the box. Surprised my mom still had it. It was kind of a fundraiser. I think it was like 50 cents. It was a red key shaped like an elephant. And you went to the exhibit and you turned it. Sonny, idiot. Would you speak and tell you all about the animals?
Oh, okay.
Do you guys still have a lot of peacocks that are around?
Yes.
Walk around?
Yes. I don't know
I
how.
remember that just being just something too.
Yeah.
It's been years
Yep.
since I've been there. I mean,
Yeah.
My dad retired. It was, he hadn't been doing the Chimp Shows obviously in many, many years. And I do know that there were just so many peacocks that you just never knew. Like you turn a corner and
Yep.
pull out.
The peafowl are still all over the place. They still have access to the entire zoo. They do have technically they do have a habitat that they get fed in, and they have like a shelter in the wintertime. But yes, they still do have free roam of the zoo. Yeah, exactly.
I know there was a time to at one point there was a few that were the albino ones. Do you have any of those at this point?
To my knowledge, no. I've not seen them and have not heard anything about that, but I'm going to just ask.
We wanted to take this opportunity to thank Sandy very much for coming out here from the Detroit Zoological Society For those of you on Zoom, thanks very much for joining us on our first hybrid program of the season. And for those of you joining in person, thank you very much for, again, coming out and joining us this evening. And we look forward to having you back in the building or on Zoom, however you feel comfortable. So thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.